Okay, so here we are on the crash course in Jewish tradition, and in this video I want to focus on the commandments, because I think the best way for us to develop a comprehensive understanding of what our tradition is all about is to use the commandments as our framework, because they are our basic responsibility to the covenant. So I want to introduce some key points, and then we're going to use these as building blocks as we go deeper and get more detail about what the commandments specifically address. So the first thing is the definition. A definition of a commandment is the responsibilities that were given to us by God. They're outlined in the Torah. We accepted them at Mount Sinai. And I put here in parenthesis, they are not rights. You see, the difference between Western law and Jewish law is that Western law is primarily focused on protecting the rights of the individual. You know, I remember going into a taxi cab in New York City, and there, posted in front of the passenger seat was the taxi passenger's Bill of Rights. That is the focus of Western law. In essence, it's protecting the individual. But that's not the focus of Jewish law. Our tradition is about us fulfilling responsibilities that were given to us by God. And it's very different. So, for example, when it comes to free speech, so there are many things you're allowed to say about another human being in Western law, provided that it's not slanderous and, leads to a certain type of harm. But being negative, go ahead, be critical, say what you want to say, free speech. But that's not the way it is in Jewish law. We have a responsibility, being that we're trying to create a morally enlightened society, is that our laws of speech are very restricted. You're not allowed to say anything negative about another person, even if it's true. You're not allowed to say it unless there's a really important constructive purpose in saying that. It's called the laws of Lashon Hara, of like evil speech. And you're not allowed to say it, because from our vantage point, or from God's vantage point, his goal is to uplift society, to create a world that he envisioned man has the potential to create. So that's a big difference. Now, these responsibilities are not only on the individual. They can be on the individual. They can be on the community. They can also be national. So, for example, we have a commandment to love your neighbor as yourself. That's a responsibility that we all have individually to one another. There are communal responsibilities, like set up a court of laws. And then there's national issues, when to go to war, things we're going to do in terms of building a temple. So there's different categories of commandments, but whether it's the individual or the community or on a national level, they're responsibilities that we have to uphold. Now, how many commandments are there in total? Well, there are a total of 613 commandments, divided into two categories. There are 248 positive commandments, where the Torah tells us, do this, do that, observe the Sabbath, give charity, love your neighbor as yourself. And then there are 365 negative commandments, where the Torah tells us specifically, don't do this. Don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal. So that's how the commandments are organized: 248 positive and 365 negative commandments. Now, I know some people, when they hear the number 613, they go, oh my goodness, 613 commandments, I'm never going to breathe or live my life other than just be running around doing these commandments. So I want to point out, we just said they're not 630 commandments are on the individual. Some are on the individual, some are communal, some are national. So they don't apply to everyone at all times, and some won't apply to people or individuals at all. Now, not all the commandments apply today, because many of them focus on the Temple of Jerusalem, which we do not have, and purity laws that would be in effect if we had the Temple of Jerusalem. Some laws apply when all the Jews are in the land of Israel together, or the majority of Jews are there. So today we only have 369 total, which means individual, communal, and national. On the individual level, we have a grand total of 270. Now, that doesn't mean you have 270 things you have to do every day. Like you have, observe the Passover holiday, or rest on the Passover holiday, or eat matzah, or, many mitzvahs are local to specific times of the year and to specific situations. So I know you're probably wondering, what about the 10 Commandments? Didn't we just get 10 commandments at Mount Sinai? So the fact of the matter is that the word commandments in this case is a misnomer. In the Hebrew, it's the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 declarations. God made 10 declarations at Mount Sinai. And if you actually count the commandments listed there are 14. And I'm going to refer you up to the crash course in Torah, where I have a session on the 10 commandments. You'll get a lot more detail on it. So what was the purpose of these 10 commandments? Well, first of all, they served as an introduction to all the other commandments that were to come. Secondly, they describe in essence what we're meant to achieve with the scope of Jewish law. In fact, tradition says there's 613 letters, Hebrew letters, in the listing of the Ten Commandments. Now, in fact, there are 620. There's 613 plus 7. The last 7 in Hebrew is Asher L'Re'echa, which means to your neighbor. And we'll talk about that probably another time coming up in the future. But the essence of Jewish law is how we treat our neighbor, one another, and also the Almighty is referred to as Re'echa, as your neighbor, as your friend. But we're going to leave that for now. But you should just know they embody, in essence, all of Jewish law in those 10 declarations known as the Ten Commandments. So the commandments are the basic building blocks of our tradition. We're going to go more deeply into what they're all about. As I mentioned, I just want to point out one thing, is that we said there are 248 positive commandments and 365 negative commandments. In Jewish tradition, we understand that there are 248 spiritual limbs in the body. And each one of these commandments, the positive ones, represented, I should say, by one of these spiritual limbs. So when we do the commandment, it infuses life into the spiritual body that we have, the spiritual body of our soul, so to speak. Whereas the 365 negative commandments are represented by what are known as the 365 ligaments, connectors of our spiritual body. So when we adhere and don't do something, we don't sever a connection within our spiritual body. If we transgress, there is an idea that our spiritual body is, torn asunder, or we lose parts of our spiritual existence. So we're going to talk more about that, but the idea is when we observe any of these commandments, both by doing them or adhering to not doing them, we're giving spiritual life to our beings, and this is what's going to preserve our national corporation, so to speak. That's what's going to keep us going as a people. But I'm going to get into more of this later. But this is the building blocks, and then we're going to start seeing what they exactly deal with and how they're divided and so on, so you can appreciate the breadth of what we're trying to achieve together as a people. So let's do a little review. We're focused on the commandments. They are responsibilities given to us by God. They're not rights. They're things that we have to do. They're individual, communal, and national. So they don't all apply to every one of us at all times. The total is 613, 248 positive do's, 365 negative commandments, don't do's. And today only 369 apply, of which 270 can apply to everyone. And the 10 commandments, they served more as an introduction, giving over the essence of what the commandments are about in broad strokes. And that's why there are 613 letters plus the last 7, because every commandment is represented within those 10 declarations that were said at Mount Sinai.